Hello, lab experts. Welcome to the Diagnostics podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about a myth, the myth that medical laboratory science is inferior to medicine. It's maybe one that you've heard in the past. I don't know how common it is in the whole world, but today we're going to talk a bit about Nigeria. In order to discuss that, we are here today with a medical laboratory science student, Princess Chinelo Noble. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you very much. How are you?
I'm fine too. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, I am, like you mentioned, my name is Princess Chinelo. I am a medical laboratory science student of University of Nigeria, Enugu campus, or as many will know, University of Nigeria and Suka. I enjoy singing. I'm passionate about global health, advocacy, research, as well as leadership in global health, just strengthening of the global health system in general.
How come you wanted to talk about this, what will I call it, myth though, that medical laboratory science is inferior to medicine? Where did the idea come from?
Well, it's actually a very long story.
I like
I'll
long
shorten it.
stories.
I applied to gain admission into school 3 times, and
Okay.
that was because I kept applying for medicine. I really really wanted to be a doctor. I mean, from small, it was a very big dream. I wanted to be a doctor. When I was fresh out of high school, I applied for I applied for medical school, right? And I was rejected because my score was low. The following year, I studied harder. I had a really, really, really high score. I was very confident that I was going to get into medical school because that was one of the criteria for getting into medical school. You need to have a really, really high score. So I had a really high score. I was very confident. Unfortunately, I didn't still get in, and that
Mhm.
broke me. Right, that completely shattered my dreams. I was completely discouraged. Then the following year, I had to try it again. A cousin who was already a doctor just told me to why don't you just try applying for something close to medicine, maybe nursing, med lab sciences, physiotherapy. Now I had to study extensively on what I really wanted because the options were a lot, right? So after much study, I was really, really interested with med lab science. I was hooked. I just loved the course. I mean, it was the next alternative to medicine for me. And then I got in. I was admitted just one attempt. But when I got into school, there was still this inferiority mindset that I had compared to medical students because I felt I wasn't doing the main thing. I wasn't doing medicine, which was the main thing. And so therefore I kept eyeing them. I was still feeling bad, despite the fact that I was already in med lab sciences. I badly wanted to get into medicine. But that was before I knew the good in med lab sciences, right? I didn't know the value of my course. But eventually, as time went on, as I studied, as I did my research, I found that I'm actually sitting in gold and I didn't know it. I'm actually in the real thing, but I didn't
Mhm.
just realize it. Okay, so med lab sciences has a beauty of its own, and I've come to appreciate it in the long run.
Thank you. Going back a bit, the after your second attempt where you got the high score but you weren't able to get in, uh, what was the reasoning? Like, were you given any reason behind that? Like, what were some of the other criteria that they were looking for back then? Do you have any idea?
Well, I honestly I don't know. I don't
All
know.
right.
These things, they have how it works. Getting into medical school requires beyond your score. You need to. It's really sad, but you need to know someone. You need to be connected. You need to beyond your dreams, beyond you
Yeah.
just wanting to be a doctor. It's a very very competitive course, right? Nobody
Yeah.
just gets into medicine just like that. And
Okay, I
so
see.
even if you have a high score, there are other factors that may play a role in you not getting it. And I guess those are the factors that just came to my disadvantage.
Now, while you were speaking, I was thinking maybe one of the reasons that people, when they get into other fields like medical laboratory science, they think it's a bit inferior. Maybe it's just because for the longest time they were trying to get into medicine. So I'm guessing it's probably the same for, say, people who maybe wanted to get into medicine, but eventually maybe go into something like business or anything else at one point, because if it's something you have been working hard to get into your whole life, then if you don't get into it, I guess at some point it's almost like okay, I wasn't able to do that. I am able to do this, but is this as good as what I wanted to do before? Maybe it's also part of the thing.
Yeah.
What did you like most about medical laboratory science? You said you got hooked. You started looking into it. You started practicing, and then you really got interested. What it is that pushed that interest to the level it is?
Okay, I'll start by saying I didn't initially like med lab science. Like I mentioned, I saw it as an alternative to the real
Mm-hmm.
thing, which was
Yeah.
medicine. And now getting in, going through school, my first year, my second year, I met some senior colleagues who were doing really exceptional in the field, right? And one of the factors that also made me not like med lab science is that whenever we went for postings, whenever we went for our clinical postings at University of Nigeria Teaching Hospital, the lab scientists working in the lab looked very unhappy, right? They were just there to maybe just work, earn their money. They were just sitting around doing lab tests from morning to night, and that was really, really boring. I didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
do that at all. I felt that if you all are just sitting here, working, looking unfulfilled, looking unhappy, I wouldn't want to be associated with that. So many factors actually contributed. But looking forward, I saw senior colleagues that were doing really exceptional in the field. I started taking courses and I discovered one thing that made me like med lab sciences was the diversity. Med lab sciences is really, really diverse. I mean, I don't think I've seen any course that is as diverse as med lab sciences when it comes to health courses. There are just so many fields so many things you could do or pursue with your degree in med lab sciences. Even when we are doing in our classes, normally during our classes, when we are talking about microbiology, immunology, histopathology, clinical chemistry, I'm like, this is not something we can study in 5 years. Because if you want to go in depth and get the adequate knowledge that will build the foundation for innovation or for new things, it's not something that you do in 5 years. So one thing I really love about med lab science is that it's really, really diverse,
Yeah.
extremely diverse.
You said you went to the lab and then the people you saw didn't look that happy. Like, did you try discussing with them? What were some of the reasons? Any ideas why maybe no? You just stayed away from them.
It's not really asked,
All
but
right.
I mean, somebody was like their job, you would know.
Yeah.
And I can tell that from the way they were teaching, I think out of about 10 scientists units on each bench, three or so were like very enthusiastic, based on the way they interacted with us and based on the way they responded to our questions. I mean, not that they didn't respond, right? They did, but the passion just wasn't there.
Yeah. It's like responding as if you are forced to be there.
Or you can't just wait to leave.
I think in some cases, the difference also sometimes in the lab. So having been on both sides, having been on the student side and having been on the side of the person who is also teaching the students what to do, in some cases, it's also that you have your job already that you're supposed to be doing. And then all of a sudden, like you are seeing the students come in, right? And then you have to be doing both things at the same time, which technically are things that normally you should have someone focusing on one and someone focusing on the other, so that they can have all of their thoughts on that. But if you have to be working on your samples and making sure you don't make any errors and then checking everything correctly, and at the same time checking what the students are doing. And every once in a while, you may want to give a job to the student, right, to do. But then you start thinking about the time that is going to take if the student makes an error. Because if, let's say, your samples have to go out, the results have to go out, you know that the doctor is going to be calling you to ask where his results are. And you want to give it to the student, but at the same time, you're like, if I give it to him and then he messes up, then I'm the one that's going to be shouted at. So I think it's kind of a mixture also. I think that's one thing that we also need to look into, making sure that when students come to the laboratory, there's a set of people that is there to be able to take care of them from beginning to end. Because when you want everybody to be doing the same job, then eventually they get to a stage where they become a bit unhappy because they feel like there's this extra work that has just come around and they still have the same number of hours in the day. They're still paid exactly the same, and then everything becomes just more complicated. But then sometimes, of course, you get those people who
I
are,
saw it.
yeah.
I saw it from that angle too. And I think another problem could be that they were overworked, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a limit to the particular samples they are supposed to work with in a day or in a particular hour or at least in a shift.
Yeah.
But you see them working sometimes 3, 4 times that amount. And
Mm-hmm.
this tiredness, fatigue can affect their efficiency. As
Yeah.
they go on, they may just start being inaccurate and really frustrated. So I don't blame them, honestly.
Yeah,
I
because
just
you
I just blame the system.
Yeah, you can't really control the number of samples you get. Now, I don't know whether you've ever had that situation where sometimes you're at the laboratory, you're on a day, maybe it's a bit slow. You don't get that many samples, but at the end of the day, you still feel tired. So I've always felt like that had to do a lot with the amount of cortisol and the amount of stress that's in the job, because you never know when the samples are going to come. You never know exactly what's going to happen. So think about it this way: you have that already on a day where, let's say, there isn't that much, and then plus the extra work in some cases. And so in some situations, you have people that really, really want to go on vacation, but they can't because there's always work. And sometimes maybe when you distress, maybe a weekend or maybe a holiday, on that day you're at the lab also. So the regulation is
Yeah.
regulating that. It can be complex, can be a bit complex.
System.
But then you said you saw also some people who were excelling at their jobs. What was the difference between those groups? Like, what were they doing that made you think, okay, they're really doing well, everything is going fine for them?
Yeah, I've said those ones, they went the extra mile, right? They, beyond teaching us, they genuinely wanted to see things that we learned,
Mhm.
and they were just doing their best. They were just doing all they could,
Yeah.
right? They were drilling us with questions. They would use other learning forms. They would recommend books or videos to watch. They would
Hmm.
recommend practicing at home, things like that. They
Yeah.
would just, when you have tutors, like, real tutors, that was just the difference between those two. And I'd say those ones, obviously they do love their jobs. I don't know if it's just beyond loving their jobs. Some people just have this passion. Passion
Hmm.
differs, right?
Yeah.
Passion for different things differs. You may see someone who is really good at music, loves singing, and you see someone who absolutely hates the act of singing, not because they can't do it, but because they don't like it. So passion really differs.
Yeah.
It depends on our interest, depends on just what you love doing differ from what someone else loves doing.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
they really had passion for the course, probably.
So I think
It's
going back
it could
to
also
our
depend on their personality.
Yeah, exactly. Also depends on the personality, like you said. Now, going back to our topic of different medical laboratory science and why it's a good study field. One thing also about medical laboratory science is maybe one of the things also is that it's not very well known. Like, did you know about medical laboratory science before? You said it's a cousin that talked to you about it. Like, did you know really about medical laboratory science? Had you heard about it before the idea was floated to you that it could be a good alternative to medicine, or you didn't know about it before then?
No, I didn't. Throughout my high school growing up, all I had in mind was medicine. I never heard. I mean, I knew I classified them all as doctors. I had doctors and nurses. So anybody
Mm-hmm.
wearing lab coat was a doctor. So I didn't know that there was med lab science as a field different. And whenever we are going to the hospital to perform tests as a child, my mom would tell me we are going to see a doctor. So if they were med lab sciences, I wouldn't have known you were still a doctor to me.
Yeah.
And it was when I finished high school and when I was searching for alternatives, medicine, when I was rejected 2 times, that's when I knew that, med lab sciences, I've heard of it. Why not give it a try?
Yeah. So it's a bit different. Because I think that's one thing also. People don't necessarily know what it is really. And maybe that's one of the reasons also why
Yeah.
when people get into medical laboratory science later, they kind of think of it as inferior because it's not as well known. There's not that prestige of being called a doctor because it's something like you've seen it in movies, we've seen it kind of all over in society. Our parents maybe want us to become doctors. You don't hear a parent saying, I want you to become a medical laboratory scientist. So I think at that stage also, I mean, it's since we were little, it's something we kind of grow with. And then when we get bigger, it can be hard to get out of, in a sense. According to you, what would be some ways of ensuring that that doesn't keep going on? How could we give medical laboratory science more, let's say, standing?
That's a very good question. Recently there is a program going on at my school, and it's an organization called MedLab Convo. It was founded
Mm-hmm.
by a student. So he was a student when he founded the organization, and
Yeah.
so we have a branch at my school. And what we do, we go to schools around us. We're just going there to go and talk about MedLab science, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to discuss any other course.
Yeah.
Just go there, educate the students, high school students, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
primary school students, about a course called MedLab Sciences. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the only way. And also, these schools, when they are teaching their students, they ought to give them this broad options. I mean, when you talk about health, all you think about is medicine, nursing, even physiotherapy. They don't mention those ones. Just schools have to imbibe it in their curriculum to ensure that they lay out these options for their students. And then it's also up to us as med lab scientists
Yeah.
to also teach these students, teach these children in their high school, secondary school about this course because they are the future. I mean, if we stop here, we'll all grow old and there is nobody to take over from where we stop. So we need to teach them, we need to transfer it to the next generation what this course is about and make it interesting. So I think
So
what MedLab Convo is doing is just perfect. If we have more organizations come up to take up that responsibility of teaching high school students, of teaching primary school students
mhm.
about medlab science as a course before they leave school, many of them would definitely see it as an option.
Have you been able to sort of measure how much that works? Like maybe has that been able to increase the number of students that eventually apply for your medical laboratory science programs?
I'm measuring how that works. Truth is, people always apply to medlab sciences. It's now what their intentions are that I don't know. For me, that I came in because I didn't get medicine. In my school, every year we have large number of people applying for medlab science. A
Okay.
whole lot. Some even can't be taken in. You know, so
Mm.
people always apply. The truth is, what are their intentions? Many of them just want to get their degrees and go ahead and do whatever they want to do with their lives, and they don't really want to practice. But
Yeah.
however, this teaching schools, teaching the younger generation, teaching high school students would not just increase the number of those applying, it will increase the number of those who are going to practice, it will increase the number of those who are going to be the future of the profession. Because applying is one thing, coming out of school and being ready to apply all that you've been taught is another thing. People who apply are a lot, a whole lot. But how many are retained in the profession when they finish school? So this method of teaching younger generation, high school students and primary school students, would may not influence those applying, but it's definitely influence those that will be retained in the profession, those who will stay here and move the profession forward.
So let me push back a little bit here. Well, not really push back, but take it in a slightly different direction. So yes, people are applying, but what I'm wondering, so same thing here, same thing in Benin Republic. Lots of people apply to medical laboratory science. Universities sometimes don't have correct quotas in the sense that when people finish, the supply of people that want to do the jobs is higher than the amount of jobs that they can actually get. And so in reality, you have people that may want to work within the field, but they don't necessarily have the amounts of jobs available in order to be able to work within the field. Or sometimes they finish and then that's when they start realizing what medical laboratory science is really about, because maybe before then they were not like in a lab proper, or maybe they were in a lab, but maybe they were treated as interns. It's not necessarily the same level of work. It's not necessarily the same level of responsibility they are given when you're a medical laboratory scientist as opposed to when you're an intern. And maybe you have to come on holidays, you have to come during vacations, you have to come on weekends, and you have the night shifts, you have day shifts. Some people, they don't necessarily realize what it is about until they get in the field, and they don't necessarily realize the routine aspect of it. Yes, you get different kinds of samples, different kinds of patients, but what you are doing, the way you do the test, aside from when you have problems and then you have to troubleshoot, there's a similarity to it. And people don't necessarily get that until they're in the job. And then after a while, they start saying that they are, how I put it, that they are getting bored. So maybe one thing we should also try and do is, but I think in Nigeria, at least there is, well, the only, you have that program where you have to spend a year in the lab, but the only thing is that is usually after you're done with your degree, right?
Okay, you were talking about realizing the value in the profession when you eventually when you're done.
Mm-hmm.
I myself wouldn't have realized the value in the profession, mentorship, if not for senior colleagues I look up to and who are already breaking ground in the profession, who I look up to and I see, oh my goodness, I can actually do something good with this profession. So this is when our mentorship comes to place, right? When we're in school as undergraduates, senior scientists who's already in the system, those who are already thriving, should ensure that you're not just working, you're not just breaking ground, and then nobody's following you right behind. We need this where mentorship plays a role. I mean, as an undergraduate, we need mentors. We need mentors who are already in the system. We need mentors already on the bench. We need mentors already working We need mentors in public health, we need mentors in business, because as diverse as you may have difficulty navigating through each of these aspects. You don't have somebody mentoring you. So when you leave school and you see that I didn't make most of this profession, definitely you won't be happy. But it's not too late to start. It's not too late to start to unlearn and start to relearn all that you need to know. Because being stuck somewhere where you're not able to fully use your gifts, or where you're not able to fully use your knowledge, being able to fully use your thinking, or being able to innovate is one of the most frustrating things you can do, right? So when you now live and you realize that you missed out on the juicy part of the question, I don't think it's too late to start. If you're still an undergraduate and you're yet to finish school, good and fine. Find those you can follow. Find those who are already breaking ground in the profession. Follow them. If possible, get them to mentor you. It's not so easy to ask someone to mentor you, but you can start reading widely about this course, about the different aspects. Find a niche down, and then find a mentor. If you're done with school, it's not too late to start to unlearn. I mean, unlearning and relearning is one vital skill that we need to learn. It's a very, very important life skill. So you need to unlearn what you knew, and relearn and put into the system again. I don't think it's ever late for anybody.
Yeah, I was saying so. Yeah, that's very true. At some point, you need to be able to assess yourself and then figure out what exactly is happening within within your career. And if things are not going the right way, then that means you need to change something in every case, and it doesn't hurt to try. We talked in a couple different places about seeing some of your seniors breaking ground within the field, and that inspired you to take it a lot more seriously. What are some of the ways that you saw that inspired you? Let's say for anyone that's watching that would like to know the directions that they could go in, what did you see that really inspired you to get more interested in the field? Or what were some of those ways that they were breaking ground?
So I was
Okay.
saying that you be asking how my senior colleagues, what grounds they broke, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was saying some of them were involved in writing research papers. They collaborated with other med lab science students in different schools to research and find solutions to the public health issues we have in Nigeria. Some of them niched down to business. So I have a senior colleague right now who is more like we call him a business scientist. He imports laboratory materials and he supplies. It's
Okay.
just his niche. And the good thing is, so many other of my colleagues that want to go into the business world are looking at him, and he's doing well. I have another one who has entered into the public health niche. She's just basically involved with the United Nations, with the Sustainable Development Goals, and she's carrying out outreaches. She has an NGO. These people, once I surround myself with them, all I want to do is do things. All I want to do is innovate. All I want to do is break ground. So when these people are able to mentor us, people like us, undergraduates, and we have them around, a lot of them around. So if you look at your circle, if you look at your school, even if they are not in your school, I have a lot of mentors in other schools who are also breaking grounds in med lab science profession.
Yeah.
I believe that will help.
Yeah, that's extremely helpful. Like people always tend to say, look at you're the average of the people that's around you, right? So if you include yourself in a group with people that have a higher average of things that they do than what you do, of course, eventually you are going to be following them. You're going to be heading into their footsteps. And mentors also very important, because mentors, aside from a mentor, is really going to be helpful in the sense that they'll help you not fall into the same traps that they fell in as they were growing up. And so things become a lot easier for you. The one thing that I've always liked is being able to get in contact with people that allow me to not make the same mistakes as others have in the past. So I can kind of go faster rather than doing the same thing over and over. That maybe falling into the same traps, getting into the same problems that have already been solved in the past. So it's a very good mentality to have, especially for us as medical laboratory scientists, to always try and figure out. And one thing that's nice is that there's always someone around you. Like no matter how small your lab is, there's always that colleague, there's always that senior, there's always that person that's trying to do things well and that's always striving to be better. Usually those are the people you have to follow. And as you keep going, you are of course going to get better. So tell us, Would you have any final words for anyone looking at this podcast as far as medical laboratory science and why they shouldn't think of it as less than any other field?
My last advice to anybody watching this podcast now, to thrive as a lab scientist, to really do well in this profession, you need to look beyond bench science. You need to look beyond just if, as early as possible. Try to look beyond just working on the bench. You see, med lab sciences is just too diverse for that. Med lab sciences is the crossroad between health, between tech, between any niche you find yourself in the corporate world, you can do it in med lab science. So just look beyond the bench. If possible, pick up the skills you need and to live above to live above an average med lab scientist. Think outside the box. Feel free to innovate, right? Just try as much as possible to look towards any form of self-development that you can and innovate. Just look beyond the bench
Yeah.
and you get the best out of this.
So lab experts, you heard it here today. Look beyond the bench and you'll get the best out of the medical laboratory science profession, whether it's looking into specialties that you could get into like parasitology, virology, or it's looking into other fields, adjacent fields that you could go into like biomedical engineering, or whether it's public health. A couple of different fields are fields that,
Vaccinology,
exactly.
consultancy, there are a lot
Yeah, and
there.
when it comes to research, so from medical laboratory science, you could get into biological research, and then from biological research, there's an even larger variety of things you can get into. So it's a very wide field. It's not necessarily that you have to be behind the bench in order to be able to do the work. You could even be in the area of advocacy. So we need a lot of that these days. And so try to think a bit beyond what it is that you had as far as your mindset, as far as what medical laboratory science is. Try to look, like was said a bit earlier, at different mentors, different people in your fields, and then try to see the directions in which they went. And probably that's going to give you some excellent ideas for where your career could go in the future. But thanks a lot for being here with us today. Thanks a lot for sharing all your perspective with us, Princess. How could people get in contact with you if they want to?
Thank you very much for having me. You can just check me out on LinkedIn. My name is Princess Chinelo Nobo on LinkedIn. And
All right.
if you want to connect, I'm open to connect. You can send me a DM if necessary, and I'll be always available to respond.
All right. Thanks a lot for being here with us today. And hopefully we'll have you again very soon to talk more MedLab.
I'll be glad to, and I hope that
All right.
I'll
All right.
come again soon.
All right.